He had never touched her, had never even looked at her long enough to register the color of her eyes. Until the moment he saw Robert DeWalt lean in, watched Heather D. Furman's lips part on a breathless little laugh, and felt raw, blinding one ignite in a place he'd kept frozen for years. Robert C. DeWalt stood leaning against the edge of William's own desk, arms casually folded, that lazy, dangerous smirk on his face. 2 feet away stood Heather D. Furman in her crisp black uniform and white apron, feather duster forgotten in her hand. Robert had just said something low and teasing. Heather's cheeks were flushed, rose, her lips parted on a shy laugh, eyes bright and unguarded in a way William had never witnessed. They were close. Too close. Something vicious and molten punched through William's ribs. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just filled the doorway with 6'4" of tailored black suit and coiled silence. Robert sensed him first. Straightened instantly. Boss. Heather's laugh died. The duster slipped from her fingers and hit the Persian rug with a soft thud. Her hazel eyes wide, startled, snapped to William's face. For the first time in the 3 months she'd worked here, he looked back. Really looked. Hair the color of warm chestnut pulled into a low knot, a few rebellious strands brushing the curve of her neck. A faint dusting of freckles across the bridge of her nose he'd somehow never noticed. The way her throat moved when she swallowed nervously. And that blush still burning for Robert. William stepped inside. The air turned to ice and gunpowder. Heather. Her name left his mouth like a bullet low, deliberate, the first time he had ever said it. It cracked across the room and stunned all 3 of them. She flinched. Sir? Pick it up, he ordered, voice flat, eyes locked on her. Her fingers shook as she bent for the duster. Robert watched William with new, sharp interest. I was just keeping her company while she finished, Robert said, tone light, testing. Place feels warmer when she's in it. William's gaze cut to his capo, his oldest friend, his second in command, and something lethal flashed behind the storm-gray eyes. Get out. 2 words. Quiet. Final. Robert's smirk faltered, but he inclined his head. Yes, boss. He moved toward the door, pausing just long enough to brush past Heather. See you around, sweetheart, he murmured, soft enough only she and William heard it. The door closed. Silence swallowed the office. William walked to his desk, every step measured, and sat. The leather chair creaked once. He rested his forearms on the polished mahogany, black shirt straining across shoulders that suddenly felt too tight. Heather stood frozen near the bookshelf, clutching the duster like a shield. Continue, he said, without looking at her. She moved on unsteady legs, reaching high to dust a frame. The motion pulled the hem of her dress a fraction higher on her thighs. William's jaw locked so hard it ached. Minutes bled past. The only sounds, the soft swish of feathers, her quiet breathing, the tick of the antique clock. He watched her reflection in the dark window, watched the way sunlight caught the fine hairs at her nape, watched the delicate line of her wrist as she worked. And hated how much he noticed. When she finally turned to leave, she risked one glance back. Their eyes met in the glass. She offered the smallest, most uncertain smile, polite, automatic, terrified. The door clicked shut behind her. William stared at the empty space she'd occupied and felt the first fracture spiderweb through 34 years of iron control. Down the hall, Heather pressed a trembling hand to her racing heart, wondering why the coldest man in Chicago had just said her name like it burned him. Somewhere between them, Robert C. DeWalt leaned against a wall, lit a cigarette, and smiled slow because he'd just discovered the one thing that could make William Fortney bleed. And the game had only started. The Fortney mansion crouched on a gated acre in Chicago's Gold Coast, all stone, gargoyles, and bulletproof glass disguised as old money. Inside, the staff moved like ghosts because ghosts knew how to survive monsters. Heather hurried toward the service stairs, still feeling the weight of storm-gray eyes on her skin, when a familiar voice stopped her. "Rough day already, darling?" Maria, the senior maid and Heather's only friend in this fortress, fell into step beside her. "You look like you saw the devil smile." Heather exhaled shakily. "Worse. I think he learned my name." Maria whistled low. "Oh, honey, that's not good. That's never good. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The story's just getting dangerous. Don't forget to click the subscribe button." The next morning, Heather D. Furman received new orders from Mrs. Hayes, the housekeeper whose spine was made of starched linen and steel. "You'll take the West Wing study and the boss's private office from now on. Daily, no exceptions." Heather's stomach dropped straight through the marble floor. "Daily?" she repeated, the word barely a breath. Mrs. Hayes didn't blink. Mr. Fortney's instructions were specific. She said it like the words tasted strange in her mouth, like she'd never heard them directed at a maid before. Heather spent the rest of the morning rehearsing how to breathe in the same room as William R. Fortney without passing out. By 9:30, she was pushing the cleaning cart down the long hallway that smelled of cedar, gun oil, and old money. Her knuckles were white on the handle. The wheels whispered over the runner rug like a warning. She knocked once on the office door, soft, polite, terrified. "Come." One word. Low, impatient. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her with both hands so it wouldn't slam. William was already at his desk, black shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing corded forearms, and the faint edge of an old tattoo she'd never dared look at before. He didn't glance up from the papers in front of him. The morning light poured through the tall windows, cutting sharp angles across the room and turning the dust motes into slow-dancing sparks. Heather set the caddy down as quietly as possible and started with the bookshelves on the far wall, her usual routine, only now it felt like performing open-heart surgery under a spotlight. William's pen never stopped moving. But she felt him. Every second. She reached up to straighten a row of leather-bound volumes, first editions, spines cracked from actual use, not decoration. Her fingertips brushed the gold lettering. She aligned them by height the way Mrs. Hayes liked. The silence stretched so thin she could hear her own pulse. She moved to the fireplace mantel next, feather duster moving in small, careful arcs. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw William's head tilt just a fraction as sunlight caught the loose strands around her face and turned them copper. Her hand faltered. A speck of ash floated down and landed on the polished hearth. She bent quickly to wipe it away. "Leave it," he said suddenly. Heather froze, half-crouched. "The ash," he clarified, voice rougher than yesterday. "It's fine." She straightened slowly, clutching the duster to her chest like body armor. "Yes, sir." He still hadn't looked at her. Not fully. But the air felt different, heavier, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. She moved to the desk last. Always last. The most dangerous territory. William leaned back slightly in his chair as she approached, giving her space the way a wolf gives space to something it hasn't decided to eat yet. She started on the far corner, dusting around stacks of contracts and a heavy crystal tumbler that still smelled faintly of bourbon. She was meticulous, gentle. She lifted each paperweight with 2 fingers, wiped beneath, set it back exactly. She had small hands. The bronze sculpture of a stallion looked obscene in her grip. She could feel his gaze now, actually feel it like a hand sliding up the back of her neck. When she reached for the lamp, her sleeve brushed a file. A single photograph slid out and fluttered to the rug. She dove for it at the same time William's voice cut across the room. I said, leave it. This time, he was looking. Full, storm-gray attention pinned her in place. The photograph lay face up between them. Surveillance. A man she didn't recognize, throat cut, eyes frozen open. Heather's breath hitched. William stood slow, deliberate, and circled the desk. He crouched, picked up the photo with 2 fingers, and slid it back into the folder without a word. Then he stayed there, one knee on the rug, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark, expensive, violent. You missed a spot, he said quietly. She swallowed. Where? He reached past her, took the cloth from her limp fingers, and wiped a non-existent smudge from the edge of the desk. The movement brought his shoulder almost against hers. Heat rolled off him in waves. Heather stopped breathing entirely. William's eyes flicked to her face, lingered on her mouth for one devastating second, then returned the cloth to her hand. His fingers brushed hers, barely contact, but electricity snapped up her arm. Left corner, he said, voice like gravel. She obeyed on autopilot, hyper-aware of every inhale he took. For the next 4 mornings, it was the same ritual. Knock. Come. Silence thick enough to choke on. William worked. Heather cleaned. And every day he found a new excuse to speak just once or twice, so he could hear her soft, yes sir, in response. Move the lamp an inch to the right. Those files go on the second shelf. The window latch sticks. Don't force it. Each command short, unnecessary, delivered without looking up. But she felt the difference, felt him cataloging her like a new weapon he wasn't sure how to hold. By the 5th day, the entire household knew something was wrong with the boss. He hadn't left the house in a week. He hadn't taken a single meeting outside the office. He'd snapped at 2 enforcers for breathing too loud. And every morning at 9:30 sharp, the quiet little maid disappeared into his office for 45 minutes and emerged flushed, wide-eyed, and unable to meet anyone's gaze. Robert C. DeWalt noticed first, of course. On the 6th day, Heather was on her knees polishing the legs of the leather wingback chair when the door opened without a knock. Robert strolled in, suit jacket slung over one shoulder, tie loosened, that lazy, cat with cream grin in place. Morning, beautiful, he drawled. Heather's head snapped up. A helpless smile curved her lips before she could stop it. Robert had that effect like sunlight finding its way into a tomb. William's pen stopped moving. Robert didn't miss it. His grin widened. Didn't realize I was interrupting quality time, he said, tossing his jacket across the back of the sofa. Just need the boss to sign off on the riverfront numbers. Heather rose quickly, smoothing her apron. I can come back later. No need, Robert said easily. We're all friends here. He crossed the room in 3 lazy strides and stopped beside her, close enough that she caught the warm scent of his cologne, something lighter than William's, spiced and reckless. William still hadn't spoken. The pen in his hand looked 1 second away from snapping. Robert leaned a hip against the desk, angling his body toward Heather. You missed a spot yesterday, he teased, voice low and velvet. Right here. He tapped the corner of the desk with 1 finger, then let that same finger trail barely along the polished edge until it almost brushed her wrist. Heather laughed nervously. I did not. Swear on my mother's grave. Tiny fingerprint. Broke my heart. The sound of her laugh, soft, startled, real, slammed into William like a .45 to the chest. His chair rolled back an inch. Robert's eyes flicked to him, bright with mischief. You agree, boss? Criminal negligence? William's voice came out flat and deadly. Heather. She jumped. Finish the chair. It wasn't a request. Robert lifted both hands in mock surrender, but the grin never left his face. Message received. I'll wait. He didn't. He wandered to the window, hands in pockets, and started talking light, easy conversation about the weather, the new espresso machine downstairs, the way Mrs. Hayes had threatened to poison anyone who touched her lemon bars again. Heather couldn't help it. She smiled. She answered. Her shoulders relaxed the way they never did around William. William watched every second of it. Watched the way Robert's gaze lingered on the curve of her neck when she turned. Watched the way her fingers twisted the dusting cloth when Robert complimented her laugh. Watched the way sunlight turned her eyes almost gold when she forgot to be afraid. Inside his chest, something black and vicious uncoiled. The seventh day, Robert showed up again. This time, Heather was on a small step stool, reaching to dust the top shelf. The stool wobbled. Robert was there in an instant, one hand steadying the stool, the other lightly cupping her elbow so she wouldn't fall. "Careful, sweetheart," he murmured, thumb brushing the inside of her arm. "Can't have you breaking that pretty neck." Heather laughed again, breathy, flustered, and looked down at him with that shy, glowing smile that belonged to Robert and Robert alone. William's hand came down on the desk so hard the crystal tumbler jumped and shattered against the floor. The explosion of sound cracked through the room like gunfire. Heather yelped, nearly toppling. Robert caught her waist instinctively, steadying her as she scrambled down. William was already on his feet, chair shoved back, eyes locked on the place where Robert's hand still rested light, harmless on Heather's elbow. "Get your hands off her." 3 words. Low. Lethal. Robert lifted both palms immediately, stepping back, but the grin tugging at his mouth said he'd just won something. Heather stood between them, chest heaving, eyes wide and confused and terrified. William's gaze finally dropped to her, really dropped, and for the first time, the ice cracked enough for her to glimpse the inferno underneath. She had no idea what she'd done. But, whatever it was, there was no going back. The morning after the tumbler shattered, the Fortney mansion woke up colder than usual. William R. Fortney did not raise his voice. He never had to. But the temperature in the house still dropped 10 degrees the moment he stepped into the staff corridor at 6:30, coat unbuttoned, eyes flat and lethal. Mrs. Hayes was already waiting with the duty roster in her trembling hands. "Change it," he said. She didn't ask which part. "Heather D. Furman is off all East Wing rotation. Permanently. She does my office, the library, the West study. That's it." Mrs. Hayes opened her mouth. Closed it. "Yes, sir. Robert's team uses the service staff they already have. She doesn't go near them." A beat of silence thick enough to suffocate. "Understood, sir." By 7:15 every maid, cook, and guard in the house knew the new law. By 8 o'clock the whispers had teeth. "Did you hear? The maid Heather, she's been pulled from Robert's side of the house." Fortney himself gave the order. He's never cared where anyone dusts before. You see the way he watches her now? Like he's starving and she's the only thing on the menu. Girl's got 9 lives or a death wish. Maybe both. Heather heard none of it at first. She was too busy trying to breathe through the new schedule that felt like a cage closing around her ribs. East Wing forbidden. Robert's team forbidden. Only William's rooms. Only William's air. She told herself it was punishment. For dropping the duster. For laughing too loud. For existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. She told herself a lot of things. None of them explained why her pulse raced every time she approached his office door now, or why she caught herself smoothing her apron like it mattered what he thought. William, meanwhile, was losing a war he refused to name. He sat through conference calls about shipment routes and body disposal, voice calm, answers clipped, while every neuron in his brain cataloged the exact minute Heather would knock. 9:29. 9:30. 9:31. Knock. He didn't answer immediately. Let her stand there 3 extra seconds. 4. Punishment or foreplay, he wasn't sure anymore. Come. She entered. Same uniform. Same low knot at her nape. Same tremor in her fingers when she set the caddy down. But today, her eyes flicked to the desk and the faint ring of dried bourbon where the tumbler had died. Today she looked wary. Good. He wanted her wary. Wary kept people alive in his world. He lasted 11 minutes before he spoke. The books on the 3rd shelf, he said without looking up. They're out of order. They weren't. She crossed the room anyway, reached up on tiptoe. The hem of her dress rose a dangerous inch. Sunlight slid along the back of her thigh like a hand. William's pen snapped in his grip. Ink bled across the contract like blood. Heather heard the crack, turned too fast, and the book she held slipped. She caught it against her chest, eyes wide. I'm sorry, sir, I'll fix it. Leave it, he said, voice rough. She froze. He stood, circled the desk, stopped 2 feet from her, close enough to see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. You'll work alone from now on, he said. No overlapping shifts. No shared hallways with the East Wing team. Her lips parted. Did I do something wrong? The question cracked something open inside his chest. He wanted to tell her yes. Yes, you smiled at him. Yes, you let him touch your elbow. Yes, you exist and I can't stop noticing. Instead, he said, it's safer. Safer for who? He didn't specify. She swallowed. Nodded. Yes, sir. The words were obedient. The look in her eyes was not. She was starting to be less afraid. That was worse than everything. Robert watched the new rules settle over the house like frost and decided to light a match. He found Heather in the laundry corridor 2 days later, arms full of fresh linens, cheeks smudged with detergent. Hey, stranger, he said, leaning against the doorframe and blocking her path. You vanished. East Wing's a graveyard without you. She flushed instantly. Mr. Fortney reassigned me. Yeah, I heard. Robert's smile was slow, sharp. Heard a lot of things, actually. Heather tried to step around him. He shifted, still blocking, but gently. Come on, sweetheart. 5 minutes. Walk with me to the garage. I need air that doesn't smell like bleach and terror. She hesitated. Glanced down the hall like William might materialize from the shadows. Robert saw it. His eyes darkened with something between amusement and pity. He's in meetings till 4, he said softly. You're allowed to breathe, Heather. She went. They walked the long way, past the indoor pool no one used, past the gym where enforcers bled on mats for fun. Robert kept his hands in his pockets, voice easy, drawing smiles out of her the way other men drew guns. William found out 47 minutes later. He stepped out of the conference room, rolled his neck, and saw them through the glass corridor, Robert leaning close, saying something that made Heather laugh so hard she covered her mouth. William didn't think. He simply moved. By the time he reached them, Robert had already straightened, reading death in his boss's stride. Heather turned, smile dying. William didn't slow. Stopped inches from Robert, voice so low only the 3 of them heard it. My office. Now. Robert lifted both brows. We were just... Now. Heather tried to step back. William's hand shot out, not touching her, never touching her, but caging the air around her wrist. You, he said to her, softer, lethal. Service stairs. Don't let me see you with him again. Her eyes filled. Not with tears, with shock. She fled. Robert watched her go, then turned to William with the expression of a man who'd just found the detonator. They didn't speak until the office door shut. Then Robert leaned back against it, arms folded, and smiled like Christmas came early. She's just a maid, boss. William's knuckles went white on the desk edge. Stay away from her. Robert tilted his head. You don't even look at women. Never have. Now you're rearranging the entire house so one girl doesn't breathe the same air as me. That's new. William said nothing. Robert pushed off the door, took 3 slow steps closer. You want her, he said quietly. You want her so bad you can't think straight. And you hate it. William's jaw flexed. Say it, Robert murmured. Say the words, will. Might stop you from putting a bullet in me for smiling at her. William looked up, eyes black with storm. Get out. Robert left. But the damage was done. The entire house felt it now, the fracture widening, the air crackling with something darker than violence. Heather spent the rest of the day jumping at shadows. William spent it breaking things he couldn't replace. And Robert started planning. Because if William Fortney was finally bleeding, Robert wanted a front row seat when the dam broke. It happened on a Thursday that smelled like coming snow. Heather was back in William's office alone, as always now on the small rolling ladder Mrs. Hayes had reluctantly provided after the 3rd time Heather nearly fell reaching the top shelves. She was stretched high, one hand gripping the ladder, the other balancing a heavy silver tray of crystal decanters she'd been asked to polish. Her foot slipped. Just an inch. Enough. The ladder rocked. The tray tilted. She tried to catch it, overcorrected, felt her wrist twist hard as the edge of the tray slammed into it on the way down. Pain exploded white hot. The crash was deafening. Crystal shattered across the hardwood like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Bourbon soaked into the rug in a dark, expensive stain. Heather crumpled, cradling her wrist, tears springing instant and humiliating. She was still on her knees, picking up shards when the door flew open so hard it bounced off the wall. William filled the doorway, tie gone, shirt unbuttoned at the throat, eyes wild. He took in the scene in one sweep. Broken crystal, spilled liquor. Heather on the floor with blood on her fingers and tears on her cheeks. He crossed the room in 3 strides and went to his knees in front of her. Heather. Her name again, raw this time, stripped of every layer he usually wore. She tried to hide the wrist. Failed. He saw the bruise blooming violent purple beneath the pale skin. Saw the way she cradled it against her stomach, like something broken beyond repair. His hands hovered, afraid to touch, afraid not to. Who hurt you? The question came out guttural. Terrifying. No one. I dropped. Heather, look at me. His voice cracked on her name. Did someone touch you? She shook her head frantically. It was the tray. I swear, my foot slipped. He gently, God, so gently it broke her heart, took her injured hand in both of his. His fingers trembled. William Fortney's hands did not tremble. They signed death warrants. They pulled triggers without hesitation. They never shook. But they shook now. He turned her wrist carefully, studying the damage with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. The bruise was already swelling, dark and ugly against her fair skin. His thumb brushed the edge of it featherlight, and his jaw locked so hard she heard the click. I'm okay, she whispered. It's just... You're not okay. The words tore out of him like shrapnel. He stood, pulling her up with him, one arm sliding around her waist when her knees buckled from the pain. She ended up pressed against his chest, his heartbeat thundering against her cheek. For one endless second, neither of them moved. Then, he scooped her up effortlessly, like she weighed nothing, and carried her to the leather sofa. Sit. He disappeared, came back 30 seconds later with the first aid kit from his private bathroom and a bowl of ice. He knelt again, opened the kit with shaking hands. Heather watched, stunned, as the most dangerous man she'd ever met cleaned blood from her fingers with antiseptic and the kind of tenderness that didn't belong in this house. "This will be cold," he warned, voice rough. He wrapped her wrist in a compression bandage, laid the ice pack over it, secured it with medical tape. Every touch, clinical and reverent at once. When he was done, he didn't let go. Just held her hand between his larger ones, staring at the bruise like he could will it away. "I should have been here," he said, so low she almost missed it. "You couldn't have. I should have been here." Silence stretched, thick and aching. His thumb traced the inside of her palm once, twice. Unconscious. Possessive. Heather's breath hitched. He heard it. Froze. Their eyes met. For the first time, William let her see everything he'd been hiding. The want. The fear. The absolute terror that someone might hurt her and he wouldn't be fast enough to stop it. Heather stopped breathing. The door opened. Robert stood in the doorway, file in hand, smirk already forming, then dying as he took in the scene. William on his knees. Heather on the sofa, wrist wrapped in his bandage, ice pack held in place by his hand. Tears on her lashes. Fury and something softer warring in William's eyes. Robert's gaze flicked from the shattered crystal to the way William hadn't moved an inch away from her. "Well," he said softly, "did I interrupt something?" The silence that followed could have flayed skin. William rose slowly, placing himself between Heather and the door without thinking. Robert's eyes widened fractionally, then narrowed with dawning understanding. He looked at Heather, at the bruise, at William's white-knuckled grip on the back of the sofa. A slow, almost sad smile curved his mouth. "Got it," he said quietly. He backed out, closed the door, left them alone with the echo of everything that just changed forever. William didn't move. Heather stared at the place where his hand still hovered protectively over her injured wrist. And couldn't stop replaying the way his fingers had trembled. Couldn't stop feeling the ghost of them long after he'd walked away. Heather did not sleep. She lay in the narrow maid's room on the 3rd floor, wrist wrapped and elevated on a folded towel, ice long melted, and stared at the ceiling as if it might explain what had just happened to her life. William Fortney had carried her. William Fortney had knelt. William Fortney's hands, hands that had ended men without blinking, had shaken while they bandaged her skin like it was made of blown glass. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it again. The heat of his chest when he lifted her, the tremor in his fingers, the way he'd said, "I should have been here," like the thought of her hurt was a blade in his own ribs. She turned onto her side and pressed her good hand over her racing heart, trying to quiet it. It refused. Because the truth, the terrifying, impossible truth, was creeping through her like warm whiskey. William Fortney was not cold. He was a man holding back an ocean with his bare hands. And she had just watched the tide break through. She must have dozed eventually, because the next thing she knew, gray pre-dawn light was slipping through the curtains and someone was tapping softly at her door. She sat up too fast, pain flaring in her wrist, and opened it a crack. Robert stood in the hallway in a charcoal Henley and yesterday's stubble, hands in his pockets, looking less like a capo and more like a man who hadn't slept either. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can we talk? Somewhere Mrs. Hayes won't skin us both." Heather hesitated, then slipped into her robe and followed him. They ended up in the old music room on the 2nd floor, a forgotten place with dust sheets over the grand piano and tall windows that looked out on the snow-dusted garden. The air smelled of cedar and silence. Robert closed the door behind them and leaned back against it. "I owe you an apology," he started, voice low. "Several, probably." Heather hugged her injured arm to her chest. "For what?" "For every time I made you laugh just to watch him bleed." He gave a humorless smile. I thought it was harmless. Thought I was poking a statue. Turns out the statue's alive, and it's been starving for years." She looked away, cheeks warming. Robert pushed off the door and took one careful step closer. "I like you, Heather." The confession came out soft, almost shy. "I like the way you blush when someone says something nice. I like how you hum when you think no one's listening. I like that you're kind in a house that eats kindness for breakfast. I noticed you the first week. Thought maybe there was room for something gentle here." He stopped a respectful distance away, hands still in his pockets. "But yesterday, when he was on his knees wrapping your wrist like the world would end if he hurt you worse," Robert exhaled through his teeth. "I realized I was looking at a man who's already gone, and I'm not cruel enough to stand in front of a loaded gun and dare it to fire." Heather's throat closed. She started, then stopped. "I don't understand any of this." Robert's smile turned sad and fond. "You don't have to. Not yet." He studied her face for a long moment. "Say his name," he said suddenly. "What?" "Just once. Say William." She swallowed. The name felt huge in her mouth. "William," she whispered. Robert closed his eyes like the single word had struck him in the chest. "Yeah," he breathed. "That's what I thought." He opened his eyes again, and they were gentle. "I'm not going to fight him for you, sweetheart. Not because I don't want you, God, I do, but because some wars aren't winnable. And this one would kill us all." Heather's good hand flew to her mouth, tears pricking sudden and hot. Robert stepped forward, slowly, and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the same careful respect he'd shown the first day. "You deserve someone who looks at you like sunrise," he said. "Turns out I'm just the guy who noticed the light first." Then he pressed the softest kiss to her forehead like a blessing, like goodbye, and walked out. Heather stood in the cold music room long after the door closed, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, and felt her heart tilt irrevocably toward the one man who terrified her most. Because Robert was right. She was already lost, and she had never stood a chance. Robert found William in the gym at 4:30 in the morning. The place was underground, all concrete and mirrors, and the metallic smell of blood and sweat. William was shirtless, knuckles wrapped, beating the heavy bag like it had personally insulted his mother. Every strike landed with a sound like gunshot. Thud. 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 Robert leaned against the doorframe and waited. William knew he was there, he always knew, but he didn't stop until the bag swung wild and his chest heaved with something that wasn't exertion. Only then did he turn. Sweat carved rivers down the defined lines of muscle and old scars. His eyes were black with exhaustion and something far worse. Robert pushed off the frame. "You look like hell, brother." William unwrapped his knuckles slowly, blood spotting the gauze. "I'm fine." "You're not." Robert stepped closer. "You haven't slept in a week. You canceled the lake shipment because you didn't want to leave the house. You're one loud noise away from putting a bullet in someone for breathing wrong." William's jaw flexed. Robert stopped an arm's length away. "You're in love with her," he said flatly. "And you'll destroy yourself if you don't admit it." The air went dangerously still. William's voice, when it came, was lethal quiet. "Watch your mouth." "No." Robert didn't flinch. "Not this time. We've been through too much for me to let you drown because you're too proud to say the words." William took one menacing step forward. Robert held his ground. "She's a maid, Will. 24 years old. She's never even seen the things we have, and you're looking at her like she's the only oxygen in the room." William's hands curled into fists. "Say it," Robert pushed, softer now. "Say it out loud so it stops eating you alive." William's chest rose and fell once. Twice. "I can't," he rasped. "Why?" "Because if I say it, I'll take it. The confession tore out of him like shrapnel. If I let myself have her, I'll ruin her. I'll drag her into this life, and I'll never let her go, and one day she'll look at me and see the monster, and she'll hate me for it. Robert's expression cracked something raw and centuries old between them. Then let her choose, he said quietly. But don't choose for her by pushing her away until one of us breaks her heart, trying to keep her safe from you. William stared at him, eyes burning. Robert exhaled, shoulders dropping. I already told her I'm out, he said. This morning. She didn't want me to be, but he gave a helpless little laugh. She says your name like it's a prayer, man. I'm not idiot enough to stand in the middle of that. William closed his eyes. The silence stretched, brutal and aching. When he opened them again, something had shifted, something irreversible. Robert nodded once, like a soldier receiving orders he never wanted. I love you, brother, he said. But I love her too, and I'm not going to be the reason she gets caught in crossfire. He turned to leave, paused at the door. She's terrified of you, he said without looking back. And she's more terrified of losing you. Fix it before there's nothing left to fix. Then he was gone. William stood alone in the echoing gym, blood dripping from his knuckles, chest heaving. And for the first time in 34 years, he was afraid. Later that afternoon, Robert found Heather in the conservatory. She was sitting on the tile floor surrounded by potted lemon trees, knees drawn up, staring at nothing. Her wrist was still wrapped, but the bruise had darkened to ugly purple. He crouched in front of her, elbows on his knees. Hey. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. He reached out slowly and tucked a curl behind her ear. I talked to him, he said. Heather's breath hitched. Robert smiled small, heartbreakingly gentle. I told him everything I just told you. Minus the part where I want to keep you for myself. Shh. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Listen to me. William Fortney has never needed anyone. Not once. Not his father, not the organization, not me. But he needs you so badly he can't breathe around you. And he's going to fight it until it kills him or until someone makes him stop. Heather's sob broke free. Robert pulled her into his arms without hesitation, letting her cry against his shoulder. I care about you, he whispered into her hair. Enough to step out of the way. Enough to make sure the man who actually deserves you doesn't lose you because he's too stubborn to take what's already his. He held her until the storm passed, then eased back and cupped her face. You're the best thing that's walked into this house in years, Heather D. Furman. Don't let him forget it. He pressed one last kiss to her forehead, soft, final, and stood. At the glass door, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, voice rough. I hope he grovels. He's never done it before. Should be educational. Then, he left her among the lemon trees, heart cracked open and aching in a way that felt a lot like hope. That night, Heather sat on her narrow bed with the lights off and cried not from sadness, but from the overwhelming certainty that had settled in her chest like a second heartbeat. Robert was right. She was in love with William Fortney. And, God help her, she didn't want to be saved from it. William Fortney disappeared. Not from the house, he was still there, a cold shadow moving through corridors, a slammed door at the end of hallways, a voice barking orders that cracked like gunshots. But from her. From Heather. The first morning after Robert stepped aside, she knocked at 9:30 sharp, the way she had every day for weeks. No answer. She knocked again, softer. Nothing. She waited a full minute, heart thudding against her ribs, then pushed the door open a crack. The office was empty. The chair behind the desk still warm. She cleaned in suffocating silence, every swipe of the duster sounding like a scream. When she left, Mrs. Hayes was waiting with a new handwritten note in William's sharp, slanted scrawl. All further instructions will come through Mrs. Hayes or Mr. DeWalt. Do not enter my office unless specifically summoned. Heather read it twice. The paper shook in her hand. That was day 1. Day 2, she saw him exactly once from the far end of the formal dining hall as she polished silver with the other girls. He walked past the archway without breaking stride, coat swirling like a storm cloud, and never looked left. Day 3, she was reassigned to the library on the opposite side of the house. Day 4, her schedule was changed again: early mornings, late nights, anything that guaranteed their paths would never cross. By day 5, the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath around her. The other staff stopped gossiping in her presence. Mrs. Hayes looked at her with something close to pity. Even the guards averted their eyes when she passed. Heather felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She stopped sleeping. Stopped eating more than a few bites. Stopped smiling at all. At night, she lay in the dark and replayed every second of the bruised wrist moment, the way his hands had trembled, the way he'd carried her like she was fragile and priceless, the way his voice had cracked on, "I should have been here." And then nothing. Radio silence, so complete it felt like punishment. She told herself 100 times that she should be grateful. That distance was safety. That whatever had flared to life between them had been a mistake he was mercifully correcting. But her heart refused the lie. Her heart wanted the monster who had knelt for her. William, meanwhile, was disintegrating. He locked himself in his office for 18, 20, 22 hours at a time. He drank bourbon he didn't taste. He stared at contracts he didn't read. He punched the heavy bag until his knuckles split and bled and healed and split again. Sleep came in violent snatches, nightmares of Heather bruised worse than her wrist, of Robert's mouth on hers, of her realizing what he was and walking away forever. He saw her in every shadow. Heard her quiet, "Yes sir," in the silence between gunshots on the range. Smelled the faint trace of her soap on the library books she'd touched. And every time he reached for the door to go find her, Robert's voice echoed in his skull. Let her choose. So, he stayed away. And it was killing him. On the 9th night, he snapped at a soldier for breathing too loudly and nearly put the man through a wall. Robert found him an hour later in the gym, shirt soaked with sweat, fists wrapped so tight the gauze had turned crimson. "You're scaring the staff," Robert said calmly, leaning against the ropes. "Hell, you're scaring me." William didn't stop punching. Robert waited until the bag swung wild, then stepped in and caught it. "Talk or bleed out, Will. Your choice." William's chest heaved. His eyes were feral. "I'm handling it." "You're handling it like a suicide mission." Robert's voice dropped. "She's not eating. She's not sleeping. She walks around like someone ripped her heart out and forgot to tell her body it's dead. You did that." William's fist froze midair. Robert stepped closer. "You're pushing her away because you feel too much. And it's working. Congratulations. You're about to lose the only good thing that's ever walked into this house because you're too terrified to take it." William's voice was raw. "She deserves better." "Then be better," Robert snapped. "Or let her go completely, but this half-death you're both living. It's cruel." Silence stretched, broken only by William's ragged breathing. Robert softened. "She's coming for you, brother. Whether you're ready or not. And when she does, you'd better have an answer that isn't cowardice." He left William staring at the bag like it held all the sins he couldn't confess. 2 nights later, 11 days since he'd last touched her, Heather reached her breaking point. She stood in the kitchen at 1:30 in the morning, staring at a cup of tea gone cold, wrist throbbing under the bandage she still hadn't removed because it felt like the last piece of him she was allowed to keep. Maria found her there. "Go to him," the older maid said quietly. Before there's nothing left of either of you." Heather looked up, eyes red, cheeks streaked with dried tears. "I don't know if he'll let me in." Maria's smile was sad and certain. "He's been waiting for you to knock for 11 days, Nija. He just didn't know how to ask." Heather left the tea on the counter and walked. The house was asleep, or pretending to be. Her bare feet made no sound on the runner rugs. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 2 as she passed. She didn't knock at the office door. She simply turned the handle and slipped inside. William was not at his desk. He stood at the window wall, city lights bleeding gold and crimson across the glass, back to the door, sleeves shoved to the elbow, tie gone, top buttons undone. A half-empty glass of bourbon dangled from his fingers. The room was dim, only the desk lamp and the city glow. He looked like a man standing on the edge of something final. Heather closed the door with a soft click. He stiffened but didn't turn. She took 1 step. 2. "Why are you avoiding me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. William's shoulders rose and fell once, sharp. "Go back to bed, Heather." "No." Another step. "Not until you look at me and tell me what I did wrong." He laughed harsh, broken. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why?" She was close enough now to see the tremor in his hand holding the glass. "You bandaged my wrist like I was dying. You carried me. You said you should have been there, and then you disappeared. You made me feel like I imagined it all." William set the glass down hard enough to slosh bourbon over the rim. "You didn't imagine anything." He turned. The sight of him stole her breath. Eyes bloodshot, cheekbones sharp with exhaustion, the raw, naked want he'd spent days trying to bury. Heather stopped an arm's length away. "Talk to me," she whispered. "Please." William's throat worked. "I shouldn't want you," he rasped. "I have no right." Heather's heart cracked wide open. "I decide what I want," she said, voice trembling but steady. "Not you." He closed his eyes like the words were a physical blow. "Heather, I'm not afraid of you, William." She took the final step, close enough to feel the heat rolling off him. "I'm afraid of losing what I feel for you." The confession hung between them, fragile and blazing. William broke. Not with violence. Not with anger. With a sound torn from the deepest part of him, half sob, half prayer, he reached for her. His hands cupped her face like she was something holy, thumbs brushing the tears she hadn't realized were falling. Then he dropped his forehead to hers and let the last wall crumble. "Heather," he whispered. Her name a confession, a plea, a surrender. And for the first time in 11 days, the storm finally went quiet. The Fortney mansion woke up different. No one could name the exact change at first. The air was the same temperature. The guards still stood at their posts. The clocks still ticked with the same cold precision. But something had quieted. The storm that had lived in the walls for weeks, the one that made men flinch and women whisper, had simply stopped. "Mrs. Hayes noticed it first, when she poured coffee at 6:30 and William Fortney walked into the kitchen himself, no summons, no barked order, and asked, voice low and almost gentle, if Heather had eaten. Mrs. Hayes nearly dropped the carafe. By 8 o'clock, the entire staff was moving on eggshells of wonder. William Fortney did not ask about maids. William Fortney did not walk into the kitchen. William Fortney did not use the word please. And yet, Maria saw Heather on the back staircase at 8:15, hair still damp from the shower, cheeks flushed with something that looked suspiciously like hope, and the older woman actually crossed herself. Robert saw them both before 9. He was coming down the grand staircase with a file under one arm when Heather appeared at the first floor landing, apron missing for once, simple cream sweater and dark skirt, wrist still lightly wrapped but held carefully at her side. She was glowing. Not the shy, startled glow she'd worn when he teased her weeks ago. This was deeper, quiet, radiant, the kind of light that came from being seen, truly seen, and not found wanting. Robert's step slowed. Behind her, at the mouth of the west corridor, William waited. No suit jacket, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on Heather like the rest of the world had burned away in the night. Robert's gaze flicked between them, William calm in a way Robert hadn't seen since they were boys in a different war, and Heather walking toward him like gravity had shifted overnight. Robert felt the last piece click into place. He smiled, small, rueful, and utterly sincere, and kept walking. The Empire had a queen now. And for once, the king looked like he might survive it. William did not summon her with a note. He found her himself in the conservatory at 10:30, kneeling among the lemon trees with a watering can, sunlight pouring through the glass and turning her into something luminous. He stopped in the doorway and just watched for a long moment, drinking her in like a man who'd been dying of thirst and finally found water. She sensed him, turned, and the watering can lowered slowly. "Hi," she said, soft, a little shy. "Hi," he answered, voice rough from disuse and wonder. He crossed the tiled floor in 4 strides and stopped just short of touching her. "I need to see you," he said. "In my office. When you're ready, no rush." The words were clumsy. Careful. The most powerful man in Chicago asking permission to speak to a maid in his own house. Heather set the can down, wiped her hands on her skirt, and smiled, small, tremulous, blinding. "I'm ready." They walked side by side through the corridors, not touching, but close enough that their shadows overlapped on the walls. Staff saw. Staff pretended very hard not to see. When the office door closed behind them, William didn't go to his desk. He stopped in the middle of the room, hands flexing at his sides like he didn't know where to put them. Heather waited. He exhaled, long and shaky. "I don't know how to do this," he said at last. The confession hung between them, raw and enormous. Heather took one step closer. "Do what?" "Any of it." His voice cracked. "Be soft. Be careful. Be good enough for you. I've spent my entire life learning how to break things. How to keep people out, how to survive. I never learned how to," he gestured helplessly, "how to hold something without crushing it." Heather closed the distance. She reached up slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and laid her palm over his heart. It thundered beneath her hand. "Then we'll learn together," she whispered. William's eyes closed like the words were pain and salvation at once. His hands came up to cover hers, careful, reverent, still trembling just slightly. "I'm not a good man, Heather." "You're the man who knelt on broken glass to bandage my wrist," she said. "You're the man who hasn't slept in 11 days because you were trying to protect me from yourself. You're the man who just asked permission to speak to me in your own house." She rose on tiptoe and pressed her forehead to his, echoing the night before. "I see you, William Fortney. All of you. And I'm still here." His breath shuddered out of him. He wrapped his arms around her then, slowly, like she might vanish if he moved too fast, and buried his face in her hair. She felt the moment he let go, felt the last wall crumble, felt him breathe her in like oxygen after drowning. They stood like that for a long time. Eventually, he pulled back just far enough to look at her. "You stay by my side," he said, voice low, fierce, final. "No matter what that makes you. No matter what anyone says. No matter what this life costs, you stay." Heather didn't hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then. Not the desperate, starving clash she might have expected from weeks of tension. This was slow, deliberate, worshipful. A promise pressed to her lips in the language he'd never been taught. When they parted, foreheads still touching, he whispered against her mouth, "I love you." The words were clumsy, terrified, perfect. Heather smiled through fresh tears. "I know," she whispered back. "I've known since you carried me." Later, much later, the office door opened again. William sat at his desk, tie still missing, sleeves rolled, reviewing shipment manifests with a calm that bordered on serene. Heather stood beside his chair, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, reading the same page, pointing out a discrepancy in the numbers with the quiet confidence of someone who now belonged there. Robert walked in without knocking, file in hand, and stopped dead. The tableau hit him like sunrise. William relaxed in a way Robert hadn't seen in years, Heather glowing softly at his side, and William's hand, broad, scarred, possessive, covering hers where it rested.